Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. Welcome back for a special episode of Legal Tea. This episode is our 1-year episode, meaning we've been doing this thing for 52 whole weeks somehow. I think at one time and a handful of episodes back, I think I said I might try to do something to celebrate it being 1 year since Legal Tea started. But let's be real. Keep in mind, I'm a full-time attorney, which is what generates so many of these stories I share on here. So between that and Legal Tea and having somewhat of a personal life, this episode sort of just got here fast. So sorry about that. On today's episode, which happens to be a current trends episode, we're going to be looking back at past episodes and bringing you up to date on what's occurred since that episode aired. And I think that still counts as a current trends episode, right? So let's dive in. On episode number 2, we talked about Prince's estate. The musician, the legend, Prince, and what happened following his passing. If you recall, a dispute arose between the estate and the IRS. And at the time of the episode, Prince's estate was still, kind of active. You see, the estate representative, which was Comerica Bank and Trust, said Prince's estate value was just north of $80 million. But the IRS argued it was worth more. And of course, the more the estate is worth, the bigger payday for Uncle Sam. Well, just a handful of months ago in January 2022, which was after our Legal Tea episode on Prince, the IRS and the estate finally reached a settlement on the estate's value. According to Entertainment Weekly, the estate and the IRS agreed that the estate would be valued at $156.4 million. So yeah, that was a big TBD when we talked about it many weeks ago. So there's an update on Prince's estate for you. Since that was still going on, the estate administration was still pending. So hopefully this will be able to close things out really soon. Okay, next update is on episode number 4, where we talked about Britney Spears' guardianship. And really what happened to lead to her being under guardianship and what happened during the guardianship. Well, if you have been totally living under a rock, Britney Spears is no longer under the guardianship that we talked about on episode number 4. It was terminated after our episode aired. It was terminated in November of 2021. And, there was definitely talk about it getting terminated, especially when she got her attorney, Matthew Rosengart, involved. Beyond that, and much more recently, she just got married, which I think, if I remember correctly, was something that she was restricted from doing while under the guardianship. And she married her longtime boyfriend, Sam, in a rather intimate but star-studded event on June 9th, 2022. And word on the street is there is a rock-solid prenup in place. Good girl, Britney. On episode number 11, we talked about another musician, another legend, Michael Jackson, and what happened following his passing. Well, for this episode's update, it's kind of a rather fun one. So, according to Billboard, an announcement that came in May 2022, Sony Music and Michael Jackson's estate representatives confirmed that on November 18th of this year, 2022, Thriller 40 will be released in honor of the iconic song Thriller and Thriller's 40th anniversary. What is it, you ask? What are they doing in celebration? Well, it is a double CD set which will contain the original Thriller song and never released songs that Michael Jackson had worked on. So if you're a big Michael Jackson fan, mark your calendars for November 18th. Next, on episode number 14, we talked about Kobe Bryant, the basketball legend himself, and what happened following his passing. As you may recall, he had a pretty solid estate plan. He messed up a little bit and forgot to update his trust to add his last child, but thankfully that was sorted out. It did require court involvement, but it did get straightened out. Anyway, so there's kind of a cool update related to Kobe and his estate. In early May 2022, Kobe's wife, Vanessa Bryant, announced that in honor of her late husband and daughter, Gigi, who were both killed in a helicopter accident, there are going to be 10 basketball courts across the United States that are going to be renovated. In collaboration with Body Armor and the Mamba and Mambacita Sports Foundation, the courts will be in the following cities: LA, Philadelphia, DC, Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, Dallas, Miami, Phoenix, and Detroit. Boo, no Indiana. She did give fans a sneak peek of the courts on her Instagram if you care to check it out. So it sounds like she's keeping that Mamba mentality and having it live on. Love it. Next, on episode 23, we talked about the actor Robin Williams and what happened following his passing. An update that occurred following our Legal Tea episode is that Robin Williams' estate filed a lawsuit in February of 2022 against Pandora, stating that they streamed Robin's jokes without appropriate licensing, according to TheVerge.com. It is said that the estate is seeking $4.1 million in damages from this copyright infringement. Wow, hefty chunk of change. As of now, that is the latest update that the lawsuit has been filed. So it is definitely an active current issue that Robin Williams' estate is dealing with. Next, on episode 28, we talked about the Denver Broncos football team and the future of the team following the passing of the former owner, Pat Bowlen, who had placed the ownership of the team into a trust. So if you recall, there was a lot of talk of one of Pat's kids becoming the owner. But there were arguments and litigation that ensued. Well, just recently, in early June of 2022, a headline hit. The Broncos have been sold, and not to any of the children. According to an ESPN article, the price tag is a whopping $4.65 billion, billion with a B, and the team was sold to the Walton Penner family. Does that name ring a bell? Well, if it does, it's likely because the Walton Penner Group is headed by the heir of Walmart, Rob Walton, Rob's daughter, Carrie Walton Penner, and Carrie's husband, Greg Penner, and along with a lady by the name of Melody Hobson, who has quite the resume herself, like co-CEO of Ariel Investments, chair of the board of Starbucks, she's a director at JP Morgan Chase. But anyway, things are not yet finalized, but they're on a really good path to be done soon. And according to ESPN, the agreement has to be approved by the NFL's Finance Committee, though no issues are expected. Wow. Next, on episode 34, we talked about what was going on with Wendy Williams. So, Wells Fargo thought that Wendy was incapacitated. That's what we talked about in our episode. And Wells Fargo asked the court to designate a guardian for Wendy to control her financial affairs. Well, that episode came out in February of 2022. And following that, according to a News 10 article by Justin Melrose, in March, a temporary guardian was indeed appointed, and then in May, and now perhaps more permanent guardian was appointed. So the first one that occurred in March was temporary, while May made it permanent. That guardian, like who it is, has not been publicly shared. Though, as the piece states by Justin Melrose, Wendy and her lawyer are still pushing back and arguing the guardianship is not necessary. So, yet again, it sounds like this is still pending and active too, and probably way more to come on this. Next, on episode 41, we talked about the lovely Betty White and what happened following her passing. Now, if you recall, Betty had a rock-solid estate plan, which really shouldn't surprise any of us because it's Betty White. Though in terms of an update, especially because it's been less than a year since she passed away, things are still going on. Like, for example, according to Town and Country magazine, many of Betty's personal property items are going up for auction this coming September 2022. A company by the name of Julian's Auctions shared in a statement that the auction will go on over the course of 3 days and offer, quote, an exclusive collection of 1,500 lots featuring the Hollywood Icons Awards, scripts, wardrobe, memorabilia from her iconic television shows and films, as well as furnishings, artwork, fine jewelry, household, and personal items, end quote. So yeah, if you want to have a piece of Betty White hang with you, tune in for the auction that's occurring on September 23rd, 2022. I may have to tune in just to see what's on there. On episode 44, we talked about the famous musician, that was just really recently, right? We talked about the famous musician Kurt Cobain and what happened following his passing. Well, for all my Indiana listeners, I have a fun update following that episode, and it relates ironically to our great state of Indiana. In late May 2022, one of Kurt Cobain's famous guitars, and it's the blue one that is featured in Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit video. Well, anyways, that was auctioned off. Who bought it, you ask? None other than Indianapolis Colts owner Jim Irsay, and he bought it for 7 flipping figures. He bought it for $4.5 million. Oh my gosh. I wish I had that kind of money to play with and to spend on a single guitar. But yeah, that's kind of cool, kind of a fun update, especially for my Indiana Legal Tea listeners. Okay, so that's it. There are, of course, updates to other episodes, though I thought the ones mentioned here on this episode seemed to be kind of the bigger or more interesting ones. And it worked out beautifully that the 52nd episode was a current trends episode, so I can bring up to date what has happened in some of our past episodes. I wish I could say I planned that, but I did not. Before we wrap this episode up, I would be remiss if I did not express my gratitude to you, Legal Tea listeners. Not sure how we've been doing this thing for a whole year, but here we are. I was sharing with a friend the other day when we were talking about my podcast that I really enjoy doing this. It not only is interesting to me, but it also keeps me on my toes as an attorney too. There are some topics that I have dove into on this podcast that I probably would not have dove into and researched had I not been doing this podcast. I'm constantly looking for topics and materials to chat about on here, so when I do find a good, solid, timely topic, I dive into it. And while some of the episodes may feel like I'm sharing with you and teaching you, I've learned a lot myself. So win-win. Gotta love a win-win, right? Actually, on that note, if you have a topic or episode that you would like to hear on here, feel free to let me know through any of the social media channels. I watch them all, I promise. or through email at legalteapodcast@gmail.com, which comes right to my phone. I'm all ears for new things to chat about, especially as we start to head down the path of another 52 weeks. Alrighty, next week's topic is on estate planning of the rich and famous. And on that episode, we're going to be talking about the country musician Hank Williams. Not Hank Williams Jr., he's still alive. Hank Williams and his drama-filled estate process after he passed away. So tune in next Tuesday, Legal Tea listeners, to hear all about it. Talk to you then, and stay well.